Chapter 5. But they'll laugh at me. Letting go of our fears. I've always been good for a laugh. It just seems things happen to me. Perhaps it's because I grew up with people surrounding me that had a sense of humor. Now understand, sometimes one person's sense of humor is not always another's. So practical jokes aren't ever practical, and sometimes they're hysterically not funny. We have switched labels on canned goods, repackaged all sorts of stuff to make it look different, wrote interesting letters, saran wrapped over places you don't want saran wrap over, and the list goes on. It's different, however, when people laugh at us rather than with us. That seems to be the same, and yet it's very different. When we make a joke, when we have a moment and it's funny, or so it seems to someone else, there's an obvious end of the moment. One may never live that moment down. It's talked about for years. But the difference comes when the laughter is one direction, one way, and cuts deep into the heart. Being laughed at hurts when it's not understood that it's a joke. There must be a sign that goes up before someone pulls off a funny joke. This is just a joke. Of course, we kind of say that because we end our sessions with hysterics by saying, we are laughing with you, not at you. The trouble is when people can be laughing on the outside and then crying on the inside. The focus is the funny part is still funny, and eventually we may all laugh. But that's not what I'm talking about. Fear of people laughing at us is what keeps us from taking a hold of life and creating a new norm. There is a fear that people will notice, judge, and hand down judgments on our efforts. We all want to be acknowledged for our actions, whether they're a huge success or we just chalk it up to experience, however, being laughed at or made fun of or ridiculed or criticized. But it all goes deep into the heart. Deep in the heart is where our soul abides. Now, many lives could have been successful, vibrant lives, but someone made fun of, laughed, or ridiculed an attempt to do something, and the heart said, I'm done. The rest of their life is a big what if. What if those who laughed would have encouraged? What if those who made fun of would have come alongside their heart? The fear of being ridiculed or laughed at is real. To really love people and serve people, we must totally let go of fear. Now, I'm not sure even if it's fear or maybe just being uncomfortable, but it makes us step back when we're walking into the unknown. It makes us wince. That stops our stepping ahead. That fear stops us from touching people's lives. There's a part of us that desperately wants approval of others. It's human nature. From the time a child can relate to other humans, it's looking to please. It wants approval. Our childhood is an attempt through different adventures to please others. We want to get good grades. We want to do well at piano. We want to dance well in our piano recital to please others. It's not a bad thing. It's a great drive that helps us excel. However, pleasing others alone will always leave us empty. There's a part of us that desperately wants to stand out above the crowd. Admit it. There are times you want to be noticed. Not noticed much, but seen. Perhaps it's the inner part of our heart to be applauded that we did something that was acceptable. Perhaps it was just being noticed for being alive. It's the walking into a room and someone looks at us and smiles. It's the holding of a door as we walk up to it. Notice me, see me, acknowledge I'm alive. And I will notice you back, and we, two images of God, can begin a relationship. Relationships can't begin without someone noticing someone else. It just doesn't work. We may know we're created in God's image, that He sent His Son to give us hope and eternal life, and yet we are created to be in a community, and part of that is being noticed. Jesus noticed people. He noticed people who other people chose not to notice. It's just a part of how we are created. Much of the battle within prevents us from stepping out of our box, and it's being afraid of what other people will think. We choose to act because it's what God calls us to do. Then we overthink, and the fear of what people think will paralyze us. Our heart reacts because of the permanent marker God is writing on it with. When you feel called by God to move, act, or love, there's no fear of what people will say. If they laugh or if anyone will notice, those things go right out the window because you are being led by an inner fire that cannot be put out. Learning to serve and love people becomes an identity of its own that doesn't easily get rattled, that's not distracted, and has few other passions that people understand. The fear of being made fun of lessens as we get older. However, our determination to go out of our comfort box wanes as we get older also. Perhaps we don't care as much, but we also don't act as often. The many excuses we find to use to not act, to fear what other people think, or detain our hearts, focuses change. Sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's not. Many times in the Old Testament, fear drove people to do things they normally would not do. Elijah, almost word for word, wrote the title of this chapter. We find it in 1 Kings 19, Elijah finding out that Jezebel had an attitude. She sent him a note and said, "Na, na, 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 I'm going to kill you." Okay, that might slightly make me afraid too, but I've had some interesting threats, but so far no one has told me they would kill me. Just before the chapter, Elijah had called down fire from heaven. And he prayed for rain, and he annihilated lots of Baal prophets. God was with him in a mighty way. And one little queen with a bad attitude, throwing a hissy fit, sent him a note, and he went into the fear mode, ran, and hid. He wasn't so much afraid someone would laugh at him. He was afraid someone was going to kill him. Yet in many ways, when people laugh at us and make fun of us in any way, shape, or form, it kills part of our heart. People, especially people we care about, have the power in their words and actions to rip apart our heart. We are afraid of being laughed at and hurt. Fear cripples our ability to live up to what God has called us. Well, God went after Elijah. Elijah was hiding in a cave. Elijah was afraid. When we fear, it paralyzes us. When we fear in the presence of friends, it polarizes us. Think about paralysis. It keeps you from moving. Now think about your cool sunglasses that say polarized. You pay more for them for a reason. The glare of the surface distorts how we see things. When your glasses are polarized, it reduces the glare and one can see clearly with less strain on the eyes. Now go back a few sentences. Fear paralyzes us. Friends polarize us. The one thing God did to remind Elijah that he wasn't alone was put him in the fellowship of people. Elijah appointed Elisha as a mentee. Jehu, as king over Israel, reminded him there were 7,000 who had not bowed to Baal. That polarized Elijah and helped him walk through fear. It was a Tuesday. I had helped at the food shelf on Tuesdays in a town close to ours. I stock-shelved. I moved carts of goods from the storeroom back to the shopping room, and then I tore down boxes. Now, not necessarily the dream job of serving and loving people, but it was a need. Sometimes needs look different than when we think our mind says. That day, I was going to the nursing home to visit an old family friend when I was done at the food shelf. Why or how I came about to drive in from a different direction that day, I don't know. I do know that God knew the day's events and had, for some reason, me coming from the west instead of the east, where I would normally park. Also that day, someone was interviewing me for a newspaper article. They talked and asked questions, and I answered and chatted like I had nothing else to do. But when the reporter left, I had this sense that I was needed at the nursing home. When you feel the sense, you better follow it, and I knew it, but I delayed a few minutes finishing what I started. The intensity got stronger. So many years of listening to God walking me through weird streets told me to follow the leading. I wasn't sure how my boss would take her volunteering, just hightailing it out of my responsibility, but I knew I had to leave. So I told the main gal I needed to go, and I walked to my car. Remember, I came from the west. That meant I was facing east. Well, the nursing home was a straight mile west of me. So I went to the stop sign, turned left, heading for the busy road leading out of town both ways, which would then take me to the nursing home. It was about 5 blocks to the main road. About halfway down, I noticed ahead of me a toddler. Now, after seeing the toddler, I looked for an adult. Now, often I see mom with a bunch of kids, and, some of the kids run ahead. Well, I didn't see anyone on the street. The closer I got to the main road, the more I realized this was going to be a problem. That little guy was walking into that busy road with cement trucks and semis. I sped up, and right before this stop sign did a quick U-turn. I jumped out of the car and ran toward the road. I figured if I grabbed him from behind, he might step away from me and into the road. With that in mind, I jumped into the road and came at him from the road. He stepped off the curb, saw me, and stepped back onto the curb. Semis were flying by, seemingly unaware of the danger we had just averted. Another lady had seen the situation, pulled over, and was running toward me where this little toddler and I were. He kept backing up to the fence, and us 2 women got down on his level. He was dressed very nicely, with a blue pacifier in his mouth. Eventually, we deciphered his name was Wyatt. He was probably 2. The lady who had stopped said she knew there were daycares, and she walked down to see if anyone was missing a toddler. A gentleman sitting on his front lawn came over to inform me that he had lived there his whole life and never seen that toddler before. A realtor was also showing the horse in the corner and didn't have a clue who he was. We walked back and forth and played in the leaves. Eventually, the lady came back and said no one was missing a child. And in the 20 minutes we were standing there, no one came down the street frantically calling a child. Well, I eventually called the sheriff's department and explained the situation. Another 15 minutes passed before the deputy came. We walked and played in the leaves, and I told stories. The deputy came and got me information and put the child in the squad car and left. I got back in my car, did a U-turn, and headed for the nursing home. I sat in a chair in Maxine's room. All was quiet. That day, Maxine was totally non-responsive. I sat there for about 20 minutes in the quiet before I gently whispered goodbye and left. In that 20 minutes, God let me process what happened. That nudging, being worried that someone would laugh about my feeling that I had to go to the nursing home, was over. My wondering why it mattered. Did anyone care? Was that important? But the reality of that afternoon was God needed me to park the wrong way, to go the right way, to be in the right place to protect a little boy named Wyatt. I have learned through situations like this, it doesn't matter if people laugh. It doesn't matter if someone doesn't understand why I feel God is calling me to act. There is no reason to think about what others think or what others will say. When God nudges me to act, I don't need to worry about anyone's reaction except mine to what God is asking me to do. And somewhere there's a little boy who's alive because I wasn't worried about being different, acting in a way that didn't make sense, and being aware that God said, move now.